I keep drinking it thinking it's gonna taste better. Hi, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cecilia, and I'm gonna share my thoughts on the books that I read in April. I read 8 books in April, and I read 3 manga volumes as well, for a total of 11 things. I read 3 books physically, 2 books on audio, I read 1 ebook, and then I read 2 books both physically and on audio. So I did like a tandem read for those 2, and then all 3 manga volumes I read physically. So I had a really good mix of formats this month. I rarely read ebooks, so I had 1. It was a graphic novel, spoiler. For this video, I will be talking about them in order from least favorite to most favorite. But I will say the last 2 wrap-ups I've done, I've kind of bucketed the books based on like books I wouldn't recommend, books I would kind of recommend if you were like in the mood to read it, and then books I would strongly recommend. Pretty much every book I read lands in the like softly recommend bucket for me. Well, that's not true. There is one book I feel like everybody should read. All right, so we're gonna talk about the 8 books first. At the end, I'll talk about the 3 manga volumes I read. Okay, so first up is actually the book that I think everybody should read. I do think that I think it's already like required reading for a lot of people in school, but I never read it in school. I feel like if you also were someone like me who wasn't told to read it for school, I still think you should read it. However, I did not rate it. I don't feel comfortable rating it. I just feel kind of icky giving it like a rating and talking like, anyway. I spent pretty much the entire month of April. I finished this on the last day of April, and I think I started it like on the 2nd or 3rd of the month. I spent the whole month reading Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl. I don't really have much to say about this. I feel like it's just one of those like well-known books that everybody knows. I do think that if you haven't read it, you absolutely should. I just think oh my god, it's just like overwhelming to think about. I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't even have like words to express. It was like so bleak that it was really hard to get through, and it's very, very overwhelming. And it like she is just one like young woman. She was just like one teenager, and people are like still living her story. This existing as a primary source is just so like crucial, so important. A lot of this is very mundane. Like it has a scope that talks about daily life in hiding, and then it also brings in some like historical pinpoints when she recaps things that she's hearing on the radio, but a lot of it is just musings of a teenage girl growing up and going through puberty. Like it's very mundane, which makes it worse. I'm not rating it because that feels kind of weird to me to give this a star rating, but I highly think that like everybody should read this at some point in your life. And I'm starting this video on like not a great note, but when I thought about how I wanted to talk about this book, I was like, I can't like throw it in to the mix here, and like I don't want to end with it because it's like anyway, we're gonna move on. Okay, the next book I finished in April was Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to Divine Rivals. I feel like this is another super popular book right now, and because it's a sequel, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time summarizing it. I enjoyed this. I thought it was a decent sequel. It's hard to talk about Ruthless Vows because I feel like the entire time I read it, I was comparing it to Divine Rivals, in the sense that like I feel like Divine Rivals was unique for me, at least. I mean, I think maybe some people have read similar stories, but as someone who doesn't read a lot of YA fantasy anymore, it felt different. But then we get to Ruthless Vows, and the story feels a little bit more of like a typical YA fantasy, in the sense that you have 2 characters who, like, their relationship I feel like was much stronger in Divine Rivals. There was not a lot of growth in their relationship. It becomes a little bit more similar to like a very typical chosen one arc for both of these characters. I just don't think that it had the same charm that Divine Rivals did. I think as a sequel it worked because I already really cared about the story and I cared about the characters and I was invested in their ending, but it did take me a while to read. I read it very slowly. There wasn't anything like grabbing me and gripping me back to it, and as I'm talking about it I'm realizing like I'm saying so many negative skewed things even though I like genuinely liked it, it like for me like met my expectations. So yeah. Do you want to say hello? I feel like it's kind of rude to just stick your tail in the frame. Yeah, why don't you sit? There you go. Say hi. The next book I want to talk about is a cute little graphic novel I read. I read this as an ebook, and this is The Sprite and the Gardener by Rhea Brijo and Joe Witt. I thought this was really cute. This is a story about a community. Once upon a time, these sprites would cultivate these gardens, and then as like human homeowners started building homes, they kind of stopped having this like two-way relationship. But there is one sprite who sees this like young amateur gardener and tries to help them build up their little backyard garden. It's a really cute story. I loved this a lot. I think my biggest issue with this book is I wish it was longer. I may or may not have teared up. I would recommend this. I just think it was a bit too short and like a touch underdeveloped, and I wish it had been longer. Like that's my biggest complaint with the book. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. This is a memoir that I listened to on audiobook, and my second cat is back. Great. I do love you guys. You're just annoying me. And Kelly Bishop narrates it herself. I love it when authors do that. I just like really feel like it is so much more immersive. So I loved listening to her narrate this. I think for a celebrity memoir, it's pretty solid. I only know Kelly Bishop in like the Gilmore Girl realm, which is I love Gilmore Girls like a lot of other people. I think the title kind of makes it sound like it would skew more towards Gilmore Girls, and it's a pretty well-rounded memoir that captures a lot of her life, not just Gilmore Girls. I actually don't think we get to Gilmore Girls until like maybe halfway, maybe after halfway, and we're only in like the Gilmore Girl era for, I don't want to say a little bit, not as long as I expected, which is not a bad thing. I actually wish that we got more insight to her earlier life. I thought her sections of her time on Broadway, especially talking about how she was part of the original A Chorus Line cast, like that was really the bread and butter of her memoir for me personally. Those were the chapters that I remember the best. Those are the chapters that I felt more invested in. I also just feel like Kelly Bishop had many more stories that she didn't share in her memoir, and I wish she had shared them. I think that the sections that came after she talked about Gilmore Girls were a bit superficial. It kind of read like just resume building. That's all I have to say about it. I think if you're interested in Kelly Bishop, if you're interested in Gilmore Girls, I think this is a great memoir. Similarly, I think if you're not interested in Gilmore Girls and like don't really care about Kelly Bishop, but you care about Broadway or musical theater or like dance, I still think you would enjoy this because those chapters are so interesting. All right, everything else I have on here are physical books. Exciting. And I just scanned my notes. I was like, really? I ordered it like this? I think these three feel like the lower of the pack, and this is like the dividing line where I think these 4 books feel like higher of the pack. I actually feel like this next book I'm going to talk about is like perfectly right in the middle. I do think that the last 3 books I'm going to talk about could be interchanged depending on like the day and the mood I'm in. So I read Fundamentally by Nusaiba Yunus in April, and ultimately I really liked this. I think this was a really solid contemporary. I read this because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize, and I will say before I talk about all the things I like about this, I don't necessarily get the shortlist nomination. I read another book I'm going to talk about here that was on the Women's Prize long list, and then another book I read in March. I finished The Dream Hotel by Leila Lalami in March, which was on the long list for the Women's Prize but didn't make the shortlist, and I feel like objectively The Dream Hotel is a better book. So I don't really get why this book was put on the shortlist. If you read it and have strong opinions on why it was shortlisted, please let me know because maybe I am missing something. But yeah, I think for a contemporary, this is super solid. Structure is really well done. Like it has very classic plot beats in here. I felt very compelled by the narrator. I think a lot of people might feel put off by her, but I personally was really rooting for her, even though she made some interesting choices that maybe I wouldn't have made. I wasn't expecting this book to be as funny as it was. The narrator was so funny. She was so sarcastic. She had a couple lines or quips. I literally laughed out loud. I would read this on the train and like smile to myself because of some of the lines in here. Another one of my favorite things about this, and something I wish had been played up a little bit more. I don't want to say this is like a workplace comedy, but I think I'm gonna say it anyway. Let me summarize it for you so you understand where I'm coming from. So fundamentally it's about this woman named Nadia. Nadia is a professor in London. She takes a job with the UN working on this like initiative, this new program that's rehabilitating what they are calling ISIS brides, who are basically women who have married men who are active members of ISIS, and then they are labeled as terrorists and now living in these like camps and are unable to return home because of their association with a terrorist organization. Anyway, Nadia is working with a team of other UN employees, and the reason I say like this is kind of a workplace comedy is because she's working, like this is her job. And so a lot of the obstacles that Nadia is coming across are, I think, obstacles that many people, like I don't work for the UN, but I do work for a nonprofit, and I could see a lot of these like roadblocks happening in my life. But the element in here that I really loved and wish that had been kind of pulled upon more was her coworkers. I think that they're in such a unique and ripe situation for a lot of shenanigans, in the same way that college students or like camp counselors are in a situation where they're living and working with the same people, and so there's a lot of blurred lines, and there is some of that in here, but I still wish it was more. I think the side characters were somewhat flat and a little bit like caricaturish, except for maybe one or two who went a route that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I think there's a lot of really interesting, thought-provoking moments in this story that are kind of overshadowed by some of the humor, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I'm like being very objective when I say that. So I think this was like an entertaining read that had this underlying current of some like really thought-provoking themes. Overall, I think this is a really solid contemporary novel, and if you're interested in it, I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I read Fundamentally and I really liked it. All right, let's talk about the first book I finished in April. I actually finished this on April 1st. So can I even say I finished it in April? I read most of it in March. But it's The Ministry of Time by Kaylee Ann Bradley. This I also read because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize. This is a story about an unnamed narrator who becomes what is called in this book a bridge, which is a term in this book for someone who is working with a time traveler to assimilate them into like 21st century London specifically, which is where this book takes place. I think it's been pitched as like rom-com, spy thriller, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I disagree. I would not like recommend this to someone who wants like a science fiction time travel story. I would not recommend this to someone who wants like a spy thriller. I don't even know who I would recommend this to, but let me tell you about why it worked for me. One, I feel like I'm in the super minority when I say this. I loved the writing style in here. I think a lot of people find the metaphors kind of meandering, find some of the dialogue maybe a little cheesy. It's riddled with details. There are so many passages that just talk about the 21st century as explaining it to, I was gonna say like explaining it to an alien, but they're literally explaining it to people who like skipped hundreds of years. It's just saturated with details, and I love details. I'm a maximalist at heart, in the sense that I want to know every, like the body language of every character. Like if a character blinks 2-3 times, I want to know that every time. Like give me all of that. Like I love that stuff. So I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I loved it. One of the things that didn't work well for me, I think the structure of this book was kind of sloppy. Like even thinking about it, I cannot even identify what the midpoint is. I can identify like the climax. I think where people get frustrated with this is pitched as a spy thriller. It's pitched as this like science fiction story about time travel, and I don't really feel like it follows through on any of those things. I think it tries to, at the end, give a lot of really exciting and action-packed sequences. There was one twist in here that I did genuinely enjoy, and like, you know, stupid me didn't see coming at all, which feels embarrassing to admit. I wish this had been a little bit more of a slice of life with like a romance element. The slow burn and pining in here was top notch. I loved the parts where the time travelers all hung out together. One of my favorite things that Kaylee Ann Bradley did was the way she wrote dialogue was so well done. I could tell not just like who was speaking, but their tone anytime there was a line of dialogue. It was so smart and so well done. It felt like this really absurd, self-indulgent story, and I am here for it. But I think this had a lot of structure issues that prevented it from being like a 5-star read for me. And I would absolutely read anything this author writes, just of the way she writes it. I think she would write a really good short story, which, oh my God, that was unintentional. What a great segue to my next book, which is a short story collection. Oh my gosh. This is The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. This is 6 short stories and a novella in here. I really loved this. I think as I was reading it, I wasn't necessarily like mind blown by any story I read in here, but as time has passed, so many of these stories have stayed with me. Even like the one I didn't even like that much. Like the only one that I don't really remember is the first one. First one in here, Happily Ever After. I gave a 3 out of 5. And then my note, I said, I liked it enough, but not sure how memorable it will be in the long run. So really hit the nail on the head in that one, because I don't remember that at all. There was only one real dud in this that like I didn't enjoy as I was reading, and I still am kind of like, meh. Like I think it would be a stronger collection without it, and that is Why Won't Women Just Say What They Want. I gave it a 3.5. I said, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was conceptualized well, but wish it had been a touch more metaphorical. I don't really know what I meant by that. But anyway, I feel like this one was the most unique out of the bunch. It had the most unique writing style. The others though, let me talk about the ones I really did like. I loved Richard of York Gave Battle in Vain. That one was good. I really loved Alcatraz. I think that one, as I've spent more and more time with it, I think that one's my favorite. Anything Could Disappear, I gave the highest rating. Anything Could Disappear, I think had the most like exciting plot, and some of the other ones were a bit more like mundane and everyday. My favorite thing about this collection was how introspective a lot of the stories were. There's a lot of growth in these stories, both like upward growth and downward growth. Decline, which is interesting. The novella in here, The Office of Historical Corrections, I liked. However, I don't think it works as a novella. I think it should have been either a short story, potentially 2 short stories, or like a full novel. It feels divided. So The Office of Historical Corrections, I'm not going to summarize every story in here, but I will summarize the novella. Because I just love the premise. So this woman, our narrator, works for this like new agency in the United States, this like part of the government that's tasked on basically like fact checking. Obviously, you can imagine the types of pushback that this agency gets from people. About halfway through the novella, there is an issue in this like small Midwest town, I kind of want to say Wisconsin, where a former employee of this agency has made a correction to this plaque, and so it becomes this like detective story after that. I really feel like this could have been a really interesting book. I love this idea of like the Office of Historical Corrections, or I think this could have been 2 short stories, and one would have just been like everyday shenanigans of the office, like it was in the first half of the book, and then the second story could have been the second half of the novella, which feels a little bit more explosive, very high stakes, whereas the first half felt very low stakes. Like it just felt like two stories in its own. I think if you're looking for a short story collection, if you're looking for something like contemporary, I really highly recommend this one. Okay, we have one more book to talk about, but it's Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I think this is another really popular book, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I think Abby Jimenez with this one and Yours Truly has really solidified herself as an author I'm like keen to read more of. I feel like Yours Truly was a 5-star read right up until the end. I think Just for the Summer was a 4-star read up until the end, which like kind of shot it up. So yeah, I loved this. Like I don't think it's like mind-blowing or like unique in like, you know, any special way, but I think that I read this and it was just so clear that like Abby Jimenez knows what she's doing. Like I trust her now. I'm a huge sucker for a slow burn, and wish this had been slower. You know, a lot of people said that you had to have read Part of Your World and Yours Truly before reading Just for the Summer, which is the only reason why I read Part of Your World and Yours Truly. Like I kind of have to agree with them. And it wasn't really until the ending that really solidified it. Like, I think you could have read this on its own, but I think the impact that the climax has would not be as impactful if you didn't understand the context of some of the other characters that are introduced in earlier books. I will say the only reason this is also not like a super 5-star read for me was the beginning was kind of slow. I don't know what that was about. It took a while for me to really be invested in their relationship, which was odd. Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Really, I thought really good. I know she has another book coming out, or did it just come out? I'm on the wait list for the audiobook, but the hold says it will take several months to come in, so we're almost done. I'm saying that both to you, if you've watched this far, and to me, who's been watching the time tick on by. I've been sitting here for an hour and 14 minutes. I don't know. So much of it is blabbing. Like, I really have no respect for myself when I edit. All right, let's talk about the manga I read this month. I only read 3 manga volumes, and I'm not going to talk too much about them because I don't really have much to say. The first 2 manga volumes I read were Noragami, Stray God, volumes 1 and 2. I ultimately liked them, but not enough to like continue with the series. Maybe if I had read them when I was younger, I might have liked them more. I actually own the first 4 volumes of these, and I just read the second one and I was like, it's fine, but I have so many other manga volumes that I would rather read. I'd rather just unhaul these and make more space for more manga. So that's exactly what I did. All right, the last manga I read, and the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is a series that I absolutely love. I think I'm going to like widely recommend this series. Even if you like don't read manga, it's so good. So I read the 6th volume of Witch Hat Atelier. Witch Hat Atelier is a fantasy manga, and it follows this young girl named Coco who gets this book on magic, performs this spell, and her like mother, this is like chapter 1, her mother turns to stone. One of my favorite things about Witch Hat Atelier is the art. Oh my god, it's good. It's really well done. The magic in Witch Hat Atelier is performed by drawing spells, and so there's a lot of conversation about how to manipulate spells based on like how like sketchy your lines are, or how small the circle is, or how big the circle is, or like how straight the line is. Like it's so interesting to think about. I feel like the spells, because Coco is learning the spells, they teach her how and why certain spells work and how other spells don't work. Like the story is thematically very inventive, not just like the story itself as something unique, but also it pushes these young girls to be unique, like to think very creatively. Oh, it's just so good. Anyway, It has been an hour and a half. I have sat here working on my thoughts for all the books that I read in April. Oh my gosh. A really solid reading month. My biggest disappointments were Noragami, which I don't even care. I would really recommend everything I read this month. So thank you so much for joining me, for being here, especially if you watched this whole thing and are still here. I really appreciate you. Yeah, if you've read any of the books that I have read this month, or like have any recommendations for me based on what I read and like the things I talked about liking, please let me know. I'd love to chat. Yeah, but anyway, thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.